There are many types of martial arts, and people have always wondered which one is the most perfect. Fighters from different directions tried to sort things out in order to understand who's stronger. These tournaments were held, but did not have a large audience and were unofficial. One of these tournaments took place on November 12, 1993 in Denver, Colorado, USA, and was called the Ultimate Fighting Championship. At that time, neither the organizers, nor the fighters, nor the audience had any idea that this would be a turning point in the world of martial arts. Let's remember the birth of the most powerful mixed martial arts organization in the world and analyze the fights of the first UFC tournament. Vale Tudo tournaments are considered to be the forerunners of the UFC tournaments. This competition with a limited set of rules took place in Brazil in the 60s, mainly between representatives of jiu-jitsu and freestyle wrestling. Now, Vale Tudo is considered by many to be a separate universal style of martial arts. The very term Vale Tudo was popularized by members of the great Gracie clan, who invited any fighter to fight them, and then even made this a show on Brazilian television. In the early 90s, one of the members of the Royce Gracie clan emigrated to the United States to open a Brazilian jiu-jitsu school and promote this style in the United States. At this time, entrepreneur Art Davie dreamed of organizing a tournament where representatives of different martial arts clashed, but he needed a person with a name who could make it a reality. Art knew about the Gracie family and approached Orion with the idea. Gracie supported and saw in this, first of all, the popularization of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the United States and the involvement of young people in his school. They hired producer John Mills, who had an amazing gift for persuasion, to join their team, and in a fairly short period of time, they found 28 sponsors. The idea of the tournament was to bring together 8 representatives of different styles and to reveal one winner per evening. The organizers came up with a ring in the form of an octagon, set a minimum number of rules, and set a prize fund of $50,000. Among the selected 8 fighters were kickboxers Patrick Smith and Kevin Rozier, Savate representative Gerard Gordo, shootboxer Ken Shamrock, karateka Zane Frazier, sumo wrestler Taylor Tooley, boxer Art Jimerson, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu representative Royce Gracie, Orion's younger brother, personally chosen by him as representative of the Gracie family. 2,800 people were in the stands of the McNichols Arena, and another 86,000 subscribers ordered a view on a pay channel. And everyone was waiting for how this spectacular tournament would end, in which there are no rules, weight categories, points, and time limits for a duel. The tournament was opened by a confrontation between 2 radically different styles of martial arts, sumo and savate. The 410-pound Hawaiian, Theo Tooley, had a successful sumo wrestling career behind him and decided to compete for $50,000. The representative of the savate was the Dutch karateka Gerard Gordo, who was the world and European champion in savate and weighed half as much as his opponent. After a short reconnaissance, Tooley rushed to the attack. Gordo threw a few blows to the head on the way out, but not exactly. Then, near the net, the sumo wrestler stumbled and fell to his knees. Gerard took advantage of the moment and delivered a lightning-fast soccer kick to the opponent's head, and then immediately a power uppercut to the eye. The fight was stopped, and Gerard Gordo advanced to the semifinals. With this kick, he knocked out several of the Hawaiians' teeth and discouraged any desire to participate in such tournaments again. Subsequently, the fight was named one of the 5 best fights between David and Goliath in the history of MMA. The second duel was between kickboxing representative Kevin Rozier and karate representative Zane Frazier. Both fighters were from the USA. Rozier was the champion of North America, the world heavyweight champion according to the World Kickboxing Association, and he got all his victories ahead of schedule. Karate Zane Frazier was a black belt, US and North American heavyweight karate champion. It was reported that the organizers saw him in a street fight and decided to invite him to participate in the tournament. After the gong, Rozier went forward and with several hooks to the head, knocked the karateka onto the canvas of the octagon. From side control, the kickboxer delivered a few more blows to the back of the head. Frazier was able to get up and missed a knee to the stomach. The fighters grappled in the clinch, and Zane first hit his knee in the groin, and then grabbed his opponent by the hair, delivered a series of knees, and hit with a good uppercut. Later, Rozier missed a tight overhand, and he answered with short hooks from the clinch. Frazier dominated the clinch and didn't hesitate to punch his opponent in the groin. Rozier tried to pull the karateka down, but got a tight knee. Then suddenly, a turning point occurs, and the kickboxer puts pressure, clamps the opponent at the neck, and delivers several powerful blows to the back of the head. Frazier falls and catches another hard kick to the head with a down kick. Zane Frazier's corner throws in the towel. In the 5th minute, Kevin Rozier won by technical knockout and advanced to the semifinals of the tournament. The third fight of the evening was a fight between jiu-jitsu and boxing. Royce Gracie was a member of the Great Gracie clan and a decorated Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt. His opponent was American professional boxer Art Jimerson, IBC America's light heavyweight champion, who was on a 15-fight win streak. For a whole minute, none of the fighters dared to attack. Gracie then delivers a swift takedown and sits down in a full mount position. Without hesitation, Royce twisted Art's left arm around his own neck, and the American tapped in surrender. Gracie made it to the semifinals, and Jimerson returned to professional boxing, but his career went downhill. Out of 17 fights, he won only 4. In the last fight of the quarterfinal, the representative of shoot fighting, American Ken Shamrock, and the local Taekwondo player Patrick Smith clashed. Shamrock had a successful wrestling career, and this was his 4th MMA fight where he was undefeated. His opponent, Patrick Smith, was a Taekwondo black belt who was currently the #1 ranked kickboxer in the US and #5 heavyweight in the world. In the first seconds of the fight, Shamrock made a takedown with a throw and climbed into full guard to Smith. Patrick did a neck grab, preventing his opponent from doing anything. Ken quickly pulled out of the hold and did a foot grab. Patrick tried to fight back with his free leg and elbows. The wrestler was looking for a comfortable position for some time and held a painful heel hook. Shamrock won via submission and advanced to the semifinals, and Patrick Smith, the following year, sensationally knocked out rising K1 star Andy Hug in just 19 seconds, gaining a large following. In the first bout of the semifinals, the Dutch Savate representative Gerard Gordeau and kickboxer Kevin Rozier fought. The Dutchman, as it turned out later, had broken knuckles in his fist after that uppercut to the sumo wrestler, and Rozier was badly exhausted from the first fight with Zane Frazier. After the gong, the American began to put pressure, and Gordeau hit several low kicks on the way out and hit with a hard right cross. Rozier sat down on his knee and tried to get up, but Gerard didn't let him, landed a lot of finishing blows to the head from top to bottom, and added a kick to the body. At 59 seconds, the fight was stopped, and Gerard Gordeau advanced to the final of the tournament. Kevin Rozier spent 6 more fights in mixed martial arts and won only 1. Among them, there were 2 fights with Dan Severn, but in both, Kevin lost. In the second semi-final match, respectively, Ken Shamrock and Royce Gracie met. The fight didn't even last a minute. Immediately at the beginning of the round, Royce tried to go to the legs, but Shamrock skillfully defended himself from the pass, turned his opponent over, but didn't hold the position. Gracie still dragged the American into the guard, and Shamrock tried to get on the painful leg. As with Patrick Smith, Ken gave his back, and the tilted jitser took advantage of the situation and performed a chokehold. Shamrock gave up and was eliminated from the tournament, while Royce Gracie advanced to the final. These fighters have met more than once in the cage of the octagon. The rematch came 2 years later at UFC 5, which ended in a draw. Then the rules were changed, according to which time limits appeared, and after 36 minutes, the fight ended in a draw. In 2003, in honor of the 10th anniversary of the championship's creation, Ken Shamrock and Royce Gracie were inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame. The third time they met was already in 2016 at the Bellator 149 tournament, and then Gracie won by technical knockout in the first round. This fight was the last in the career of both fighters. And in the final, the winners of the semifinals, Gerard Gordeau and Royce Gracie, clashed. Confrontation between Savate and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. In the first seconds of the fight, Gracie made a pass to the legs, but failed to carry out a takedown. The Brazilian, from the clinch, tried to hook, and in the end, he succeeded. Gracie got into a full mount and landed several headbutts on the Dutchman's head. Gerard bit Royce's ear, but he managed to pull it out of the Dutchman's jaw. Almost immediately, Gordeau rolled over, and it was a mistake. He gave his back, and Royce strangled him in the second minute of the fight. Gordeau, after the fight, spilled a lot of negativity towards Gracie. In his opinion, he should have met with Royce at the beginning of the tournament, where he would definitely have won. Persuaded the organizers to deliberately bred them for different fights. Royce Gracie became the first UFC champion. He also won the second and fourth UFC tournaments. With his victories, he popularized Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and since then, MMA fighters, in preparation for the fight, began to pay more attention to the study of grappling on the ground. Royce is considered one of the most influential figures in the history of MMA, and his name is the first in the UFC Hall of Fame list. The first tournament gathered a huge stir. It was not even broadcast on TV. It wasn't even broadcast TV that brought him great fame, but its further distribution on video cassettes, Fights Without Rules. That's exactly what the inscription read on it during distribution. Initially, the organizers didn't plan to repeat tournaments. However, due to the success of UFC 1, they decided to organize new competitions. Since then, the UFC organization has come a long and thorny path. From fighting without rules, where there were government bans, times on the verge of bankruptcy, and fierce competition, the UFC has become the most powerful mixed martial arts promotion in the world. MMA has now become a separate sport and is very popular these days. Now, of course, a lot of rules and restrictions have been added. The level of organization of fights and fees has increased. But it all started right then, on November 12, 1993, at the first, the Ultimate Fighting Championship tournament.
Now it's hard to believe, but until the mid-90s, it seemed the world thought that if you did kung fu or karate, you were a tough and dangerous guy. Wrestlers were just strange individuals in leotards hugging men. But in 1994, a man appeared who changed everything. The Beast, who made everyone respect fighting. In his book, Dan Severn recalled his letter campaign to UFC leadership and their refusal to acknowledge him, contending that wrestling was not a martial art. However, persistence paid off, and they ultimately gave him a chance. And so, the UFC 4 tournament became a turning point in the history of the sport. It was not a night of triumph, but it was the night of the Beast, Dan Severn. Dan was never a street fighter. What type of fool wanted to mess with that huge mustache? But in those years, Dan was already a famous pro wrestler. By age 17, he was an Olympian and a wrestling phenomenon. Newspapers wrote stories about him. But everything was halted by a knee injury, the likes of which 80s medicine could not yet cope. Little did we know, however, that if not for this injury, we may never have seen the Beast in the octagon. (1994) UFC 4, Oklahoma. Predating MMA, Dan Severn makes his debut in Fights Without Rules. Dan was awaited by local fighter Anthony Macias, a serious Muay Thai fighter who was himself a two-time high school wrestling champion. But against Dan Severn, it was like he brought a knife to a gunfight. Charisma emanated from Severn in huge 9-point waves. He looked like a 19th century circus performer. And thanks to his experience in pro wrestling, he knew how to work the public. However, many believed Macias would win on account of his experience with Muay Thai. The fight has begun. Macias, as expected, struck from a distance, but Severn shot to his feet and began to twist the poor guy on the floor like a rag. Macias throws powerful elbows to the neck and the back of the head, which are now prohibited. Severn felt these blows, but real pain awaited Macias. Suplex. Another powerful suplex. Macias even shook his head to get over it, but he was at the mercy of the Beast, who pressed him to the floor with all his weight. Severn prepares to finish the opponent and performs a rear naked choke. Macias is defeated, and the Beast chalks his first win under the rules of MMA. As Dan wrote in his book, perfectly understanding the importance of first impressions for the public, his suplexes were pre-planned. What can we say? Old man Dan was right, and after 30 years, Severn is still remembered for these suplexes. Dan's next opponent was a big man, Marcus Bassett, a black belt in Shorin-ryu karate, who could easily tamp his opponent down to the floor, which was on full display in his previous fight. Bassett fought as a young man in addition to playing American football, equal parts tough and cool. The Beast already shed first blood at the cage, leading to a confident performance in his second bout. Unlikely a good sign for Bassett. Old Dan exudes confidence, and where the audience was buzzing at Severn during the first, the audience was shouting in his honor during the second. At the outset, Bassett moves well and scores a powerful kick in the body of Severn. Dan felt this blow and admittedly was not eager to receive the second. An excellent pass through to the legs, but then Bassett found himself on the wrong side of the Beast's strength. Severn performs an arm triangle choke and defeats Bassett. The technique was familiar to Dan from Japanese pro wrestlers, but failing to understand its subtleties, Severn nearly squeezed Bassett's neck to the point his head almost flew off. In the final, Severn squared off against the champion, a man who conquered everyone with his technique and unyielding fighting will. Thanks to UFC management, fights were placed in that order so that the two favorites met in the final. The Beast enters the octagon with supreme confidence. The late Royce Gracie, watching alongside, understood just how dangerous this man was. Awaiting was a black belt-style fight and years of experience in Vale Tudo of the Gracie family against the big mustachioed pro wrestler. Severn moves Royce Gracie to the ground easily, but Royce was expecting this because he was going to work in the guard from the bottom. However, he had never encountered a wrestler of Severn's class and physical strength. Severn recalled that he used all his breaking techniques on Royce that worked in previous fights during training, but under Elio's tutelage, it did not work. The Beast bent and broke Gracie, but it was all in vain. Commentators failed to comprehend why Dan was unable to beat his opponent on the ground, but Severn was averse to hurting people through blows to the face. Still, Severn appeared to have Royce where he wanted him. Dan tortured Royce on the ground for more than 15 minutes. Royce would rather die than surrender, enduring everything. That is, until the perfect opportunity arose to perform a triangle choke in true Gracie fashion. Royce sprung his Brazilian trap on Severn in the 16th minute of the fight. This is how Royce Gracie scored his last victory in the UFC. After that, Royce fought with Shamrock to a draw in April 1995 and would not fight again until January 2000. Dan Severn believes that this fight became the reason for Royce's 5-year hiatus. The Brazilian understood that his opponents were becoming stronger And if the time for revenge came, Severn would return more technical, motivated, and bloodthirsty. But this is history. Four months later, Dan Severn returned to the octagon, and in his opening bout, he made such a big splash that the UFC 5 tournament became nicknamed the Return of the Beast. His opponent was veteran Joe Charles, who caught Kevin Rozier in an armbar just 14 seconds in a UFC reserve fight. The guy is a dangerous judoka. He immediately attempted to make it a double or nothing, but Severn forcefully shoved him into the metal door of the cage. The Beast throws powerful knees to the head and even blows with his elbows. This is not the same kind of Severn that we saw earlier. Charles grabbed the cage, but the Beast literally rips him from it, the brutal power of an old-school wrestler. And this is my favorite rear naked choke performed by Severn, both powerful and brutal. The next opponent of the Beast is Oleg Taktarov. This was Oleg's first tournament in the UFC. Old Severn feared a repeat of Royce Gracie, leaving him alert from the opening seconds of the fight. I assumed that Oleg wanted to work in the guard, knowing of Severn's wrestling face. But the Beast grabs Taktarov by the neck and lands a knee to the head. Severn is actively working on the ground, declining Oleg an opportunity to attempt a submission. The difference in physical strength is colossal, but few people know about Taktarov's willpower and ability to withstand hell in order to snatch a victory. The Beast had realized that it was impossible to finish off Oleg quickly and began to work more calculated. Oleg is trying to apply an armbar from his back, the most dangerous moment for Severn. The hand of the Beast is in a trap, but he found a way out with knees to Oleg's head, ultimately the undoing of the Russian fighter. Dan Severn confidently dominates on the ground, and now he threw the heaviest blows with his head. Taktarov's face turned into a bloody mask. Realizing that Oleg was not going to give up, Big John McCarthy decided to stop the fight himself. The bloody Severn shouts to an audience elated with what can only be described as a massacre. Dan Severn tallied one of the loudest victories of his career. Taktarov's will to win was on full display. No one knew that these two old-school stars were destined for a rematch that proved to be an even more brutal fight. Severn had a final fight against the tough grappler, Dave Beneteau. Beneteau was good on the ground and threw awesome blows as one hefty brute. This fight was not an easy one, but the Beast had an old-school plan, ingenious in its simplicity. Dave aggressively punches from clinches with a right hook. Then he throws solid uppercuts near the ropes. If a fighter reached the final in UFC, you knew he was deserving, but there is always a better guy. Severn presses Beneteau near the ropes and quickly hooks the opponent's leg. Closing this one out, Severn performs a Kimura, a classic technique in Sambo, defeating Beneteau. The Beast won his first championship title. The belt that Severn's team had constantly wore was a pro wrestling champion title, and Dan was very proud of it. When Severn told UFC management that he intended to bring the wrestling title to the octagon, they were not enthusiastic, since they wanted to be an independent promotion. Dan insisted, and in the octagon, he now raised not one, but two of his championship titles. In December 1995, Dan Severn entered the next UFC tournament, but it was not easy. Only champions or finalists of previous tournaments fought. The level of competition was outstanding. In the first fight, the late Patrick Smith, a finalist in UFC 2, was supposed to fight the Beast, but the medical board prevented Smith from fighting. Smith was replaced by the huge Paul Varlins, the polar bear, not technical, but a worthy competitor that always fought against the best. Varlins, with a self-inflicted fall, loses his balance, and in the car, he was simply useless. The elite wrestler easily goes into side control and throws an arm triangle choke. This move finished off the polar bear in just a minute and a half. The Beast's grip was so strong that Varlands even got a nosebleed. This was just a warm-up before the real showdown. Tank Abbott was the first MMA fighter to have the Mike Tyson effect. That is, the opponents knew they had lost before the gong hit. He was so terrifying. But even the terrifying Tank Abbott was incapable of frightening the Beast. Severn despised Tank after seeing his behavior in a fight against John Matua. Severn was a well-mannered farm guy who believed in mutual respect. But this night, he set out to teach Tank, a street bully, a lesson. Tank is known for only having one gear, full throttle. After this unsuccessful passage from Severn, Tank laid on him and began to throw his heavy punches to the body. Let me remind you that in his youth, Abbott was a successful fighter himself, but the Beast still pressed him to the cage. Excellent transfer to the ground, and poor Tank ended up in a world of darkness. First, Dan used his right hand, followed by his elbows to the back of Abbott's head and neck. These strikes are prohibited in modern MMA. A knee to the head, and great transitions in the ground. Dan grabbed the foot and drags Tank to the perimeter and refused to give Abbott any chances. Blow after blow, Tank blinked at the camera in Morse code to call for reinforcements with a helicopter, but no one responded. Abbott liked to humiliate his opponents, but Severn took an opportunity to reverse roles, terrifying blows with his elbows, which Tank somehow seems to tolerate. That man is made of steel. It was clear, however, that Severn did what he wanted. If he did not like the position, he changed it. Dan continued his ruthless assault of the opponent. Nobody had beaten Tank like this yet. Tank managed to get up and grab the cage, landing a powerful blow with an elbow. Severn lets Tank go, providing him one last chance to throw his cannon strike from the right, but the tired swashbuckler was barely on his feet. A great victory for Dan Severn. He showed that a good guy with technique and brains can defeat the powerful bad guy. Tank showed amazing will, but ultimately could not stand up to the task. Tank withstood Severn's barrage of blows, who threw enough of them to beat an entire football team. In the final, Severn met his old foe, the Russian Bear, Oleg Tektarov. Although the Beast was coming off a tough 15-minute fight, Tektarov had also been through hell, defeating Marco Huas in a close fight. But that was how the champion was determined in the old days, drawing on their last bit of strength. Tektarov had a lot of energy for the fight. This was not the inexperienced fighter who performed at UFC 5. As the fight begins, Tektarov instantly took the center of the octagon. Severn begins throwing hands, but Tektarov returns fire with a good low kick. The Russian Bear attacks, but Severn simply throws him back and goes to work in the clinch. A roll-on knee bar. Tektarov attempts a leg lock, and Severn, feeling pain, is on the verge of defeat. But the Beast is not easily pacified. Severn counters Tektarov, but throws a blow to the face. Tektarov continues to try to grab Severn's leg. Ultimately, history repeats itself, and again the Russian finds himself under Severn, an elite fighter. The Beast throws several headbutts, leaving Tektarov to hold on solely through sheer willpower. Tektarov will not just lie down, he continues the fight. The fighters again stand up before each other, but John McCarthy pauses the fight to check Tektarov's wound. Despite frenzied fatigue, the fight continues. Tektarov attacks well in the stance, a good right hook to Severn's jaw. Tektarov clearly looks better in orthodox stance, but is unable to inflict enough damage to snatch victory. The fight goes to the ground, where Severn would beat Tektarov to a pulp all the way to the final gong. "27 continuous minutes of incredible fighting, with advantage to Severn, but Tektarov is given life with 3 minutes of extra time. Tektarov continues to work in the standing position, but his punches have lost effectiveness. Another submission attempt, encountering a counterstrike from the Beast, and in the end, Severn displays Sugar Ray Leonard level footwork, drawing extra time to conclusion. You see Don Frye in Severn's corner, a year before he would begin his reign and conquer the UFC. After an extremely difficult and intense fight, Dan Severn took the victory by decision. The Beast had many eminent, worthy opponents, but following his fights with Oleg Taktarov, Taktarov is the one remembered most. Today, we return to the past in remembrance of a tournament showcasing real warriors. A return to an era of almost no rules. A tournament in which only the best fighters fought. Champions Severn, Taktarov, Huas, Jenner. The top contenders are Abbott, Varlands, Hackney, Beneteau, Denver, together under the Fillmore Vaults in the winter of 1995 at the Ultimate special event to compete for the belts and a $150 cash prize. For the first time, judges were present, determining the winner of those fights covering the distance. No more draws. Fight times were reduced, 15 minutes in the quarterfinals, 18-minute semifinals, and a 27-minute final, plus 3 minutes of overtime if necessary. Big John McCarthy needs no introduction. The first quarterfinal, Tank Abbott vs. Steve Jenham. Abbott vowed in an interview to leave a pile of corpses in the octagon en route to the title. He said that the reason for his defeat in the final of the 6th tournament was poor preparation. "Next time, I won't have handcuffs on my lungs," Abbott said. His opponent, Steve Jenham, had only one fight and became the champion of the 3rd UFC tournament. Right cross and transfer to the ground. Abbott drags the cop to the perimeter so that he cannot jerk anywhere. Jenham tries to hold back Abbott's onslaught, succeeding at first, but the street swashbuckler engaged destruction mode and performed this trick with his head, pressing the police officer's neck against the cage. Jenham could not withstand the pain and tapped. Tank Abbott takes victory with his head and reaches the semifinals of the tournament. The second quarterfinal was Paul Varlands vs. Dan Severn. Paul Varlands is a polar bear. He was a finalist of the 7th tournament, and honestly, this is a good draw for Severn, as Varlands was far from being a top fighter and not known for having quick feet. But Varlands packed a powerful punch that Severn was sure to respect. Nicknamed the Beast, Severn was the champion of the 5th tournament, successfully transforming from dangerous wrestler into ultimate fighter. Severn had fine-tuned his craft after a defeat by Shamrock in a super fight. Here, Severn drags his victim into his lair from the opening. Varlands understood that the chances of escaping were 0. The Beast begins to disassemble his opponent. Severn enters lateral control, where he grabs Varlands' neck and carries out a choke through the arm. Varlands is defeated without issue. In a fight spanning just 1 minute, Dan Severn reaches the semifinals of the tournament. In the 3rd quarterfinal, Dave Beneteau faced off against Oleg Taktarov. Dangerous Dave was a finalist of the 5th tournament, falling to the Beast, a representative of freestyle wrestling. His rival is the Russian Bear, Oleg Taktarov, the champion of the 6th tournament, a representative of the Sambo school, loved by the public for his confrontation with Abbott, and was readily recognizable in America. Here, Oleg does a somersault and catches Dave's leg in a grip. Beneteau tries to escape, but is deprived of any opportunity. Taktarov holds the painful knee lever, and Beneteau gives up. A stunning victory through the painful hold from the Russian Bear, which takes him to the semifinals of the Ultimate tournament. In the last quarterfinal, Keith Hackney vs. Marco Huas. Keith Hackney was remembered for his victory in the first tournament against a huge 2-meter sumo wrestler who reached the semifinals in the fourth tournament, where he lost to future champion Royce Gracie. This is no walk in the park, because his opponent is the king of the streets, the champion of the last UFC tournament, Marco Ruas, who amassed more than 100 victories on the streets of Rio. The fighters start with mutual low kicks. In the first minute, the opponents were cautious. Look closely. No one decides to rush into an attack. But Ruas takes the initiative to clinch the karateka, transferring him to the ground. Ruas throws very dangerous blows to the back of the head. Remember, these are fights without rules, if you suddenly forgot. Not an enviable position for Hackney, as Ruas begins preparations for victory. Ruas performs a rear naked choke, and Hackney is defeated. This victory takes Ruas to the semifinals of the tournament. And now the first semifinal. Tank Abbott, Dan Severn next in line. It appears clear from Abbott's appearance that he is bored of this tournament. Even a fighter like Dan Severn doesn't seem to rouse Tank. Even in the cage, the beast is calm and focused before throwing at its prey. The fight begins and Severn shoots to the feet, but Abbott recognized this and even reached his opponent's head with his knee. But Severn was undeterred and did not have much trouble transferring this bar brawler to familiar territory for the beast. Pressing Tank tightly against the cage, the beast begins to deliver elbows to the back of the head. Blow by blow, Severn goes all out. Severn dominates, completely controlling Abbott and continuing to drive his body with his forceful, destructive blows. Dan strikes with his palms. Maybe Severn once again saves his hands, because he is not doing well with shock functionality. In modern MMA, the fights are often stopped due to the passive defense of one of the rivals. But in the early days, fighters went into the cage to fight, with everyone understanding that they might not return to their home the same as before. The winner received fame and recognition, while the loser was often carried away on a stretcher, en route to an ambulance left with the engine running. Fights of that era were fights to determine who among them were the best in their style, rather than the number of zeros in your contract, or profitability of your draw. "13 minutes have passed, and Severn continues to throttle Abbott, who cannot remove himself from this trap, but remains unbroken in spirit. Tank Abbott could simply tap and this beating would end, but that's not his style. Keeping the faith, and after 15 minutes, Abbott rises and stabs Severn with an elbow. Severn does not want to continue fighting in a standing position, because he understands the crushing blows that Tank can deliver. Exhausted, Abbott rises from the ashes like a phoenix. With less than 2 minutes left until the end of the fight, Severn is prudent in this fight, controlling Abbott at the cage. And now the fighters are at a distance, but there is too little time to finish Severn. The fight concludes, going the entire distance of 18 minutes, and Abbott, as a sign of indignation, leaves the octagon without waiting for the judge's verdict. It was already clear to everyone, however. By unanimous decision, Dan Severn becomes the first finalist of the tournament, where he will await the winner of the pair, Oleg Tektarov and Marco Ruas. Tektarov, representing the Sambo school, against the Brazilian who owns not only luta livre belts, jiu-jitsu, judo, taekwondo, but he also possesses good striking technique. King of the streets, Marco Ruas. Tektarov starts with a kick. Ruas responds with tight low kicks. Moving Oleg to the cage with the help of a somersault, he tries to perform a painful one on his leg unsuccessfully. After 5 minutes, the fighters were exhausted. Again a low kick from Ruas. Oleg tries to pick up the leg again, but Marco sees everything. With an accurate left hook from Tektarov, the Russian bear takes the neck and tries a choke, but we all know how Ruas can endure. Oleg holds his neck in a grip, but it is apparent that Oleg is drained, without the strength to finish the job. McCarthy decides to raise the fighters to a stand, realizing that the hold was ineffective, with neither fighter taking the initiative to go on the offensive. The fight ends, and the judges unanimously give the victory to Taktarov. His reward? A meeting with the Beast, Dan Severn. The finals? Dan Severn vs. Oleg Taktarov. Severn's powerful palm strikes. Severn tames Taktarov's zeal and shows who is daddy here. Oleg, with a beloved trick, catches Severn's leg and tries to apply a painful hold. Severn takes another blow. Severn successfully controls Oleg on the ground and delivers a headbutt inflicting damage to Taktarov. Control continues with periodic attacks from Severn. It is very difficult for Taktarov to cope with a fighter like Severn, who is 18 kilograms heavier than Oleg. And prior to this final, Severn was on more rest than Taktarov. When Taktarov fought in the second semifinal, Severn was resting. Taktarov still manages to rise, but 15 minutes of the fight have passed. A short break. Taktarov is ragged and very tired, where Severn appears fresh. The fight continues. Taktarov goes on the attack, but does not extract anything from the effort. The fight continues and goes to the ground again. Severn remains active on the ground, deterring the referee from raising the fighters. The time has favored Severn. And now regulation has expired, 27 minutes in without a winner, and we arrive at 3 minutes of extra time. Taktarov decides to act, going on the attack with his last bit of strength, but it's too little too late against such a fresh and powerful fighter like Severn. Following 30 minutes, it's up to the judges. By unanimous decision, Dan Severn is the winner of the UFC Ultimate Tournament, a tournament in which the fate of the fight was decided for the first time by the judges. On July 12, 1996, Birmingham, Alabama hosted the 10th UFC, codenamed The Tournament. Promotion Management returned the original format of the tournament, the Good Old Eight. At this championship, we await the first appearance of Mark Coleman, who by that time had won almost everything he could in amateur wrestling, and even took part in the '92 Summer Olympic Games. We will also see UFC 8 champion Don Frye, as well as a finalist from that tournament, Gary Goodridge. This tournament opens with the first pair of quarterfinalists, Mark Hall and Don Frye. Mark Hall reached the semifinals of UFC 7. Earned a victory over a 176-kilogram sumo wrestler at the last tournament. Owns the black belt in Muyado, which is a synthesis of techniques taken from Taekwondo, Kung Fu, and Hap Kid. He also has black belts in Taekwondo and Karate, even a blue belt in Japanese Jiu-Jitsu. His rival is Don Frye, nicknamed the Predator, a freestyle wrestler with a good shot after winning the 8th tournament, where it took him only 3 minutes and 10 seconds to pass all his rivals, gaining popularity and notoriety. And here is Bruce Buffer in his Octagon debut as ring announcer. Frye came to this fight with a single defeat, tallying a streak of 4 consecutive victories. Mark Hall starts with a roundhouse kick. You can't surprise Frye with such twists. He simply catches his opponent and throws him to the canvas, where he begins to methodically beat the body. While Mark Hall is figuring out how to get out of this tough spot, Frye, meanwhile, continues to pepper his body with punches. It appears like Mark Hall does not even attempt to change the situation in his favor. Many believe that this was a contractual fight in which Mark Hall was supposed to lose to Don Frye for a decent monetary reward for the times, which of course he never received. In perfect sight, Mark Hall appears to merely accept his fate per the agreement. At the very least, this is a fight that raises a lot of questions. Frye continues his beating. He strikes and strikes. Even a bruise is visible on Mark Hall, which, as it were, emphasizes the reality of this fight, but this is very hard to believe. Big John simply got tired of looking at it and stopped the fight. Don Frye's victory takes him to the semifinals of the tournament. And my dear viewers, I want to ask you, was there any point for Frye to bribe a fighter like Hall? I want to see your take in the comments below the video. And now the next pair of quarterfinalists. It's Scotty Fiedler against Brian Johnston. Scotty Fiedler was 29 years old, 193 centimeters tall, 106 kilograms, with a kickboxing style. I would like to thank his hairdresser. His rival is Brian Rage Johnston. Johnston was 26, 193 centimeters tall, 100 kilograms, with a black belt in judo, champion of the Golden Gloves, with a kickboxing style. Fiedler starts out with a low kick to the lower leg. Johnston uses his judo skills and throws a couple of good blows. But Fiedler gets behind Johnston, where he attempts an odd chokehold, unsuccessfully. Not a bad strike, but Johnston managed to remove himself from the disadvantage with repeated strikes to Fiedler's head. McCarthy stops the fight in order to protect Scotty Fiedler from injury and that hairstyle. Brian Johnston's TKO victory takes him to the semifinals of the tournament, straight to the meeting with Don Frye. Up next, Mark Coleman's quarterfinal bout against Moti Horenstein. Coleman was still in college when he found out about the birth of MMA. He watched Royce Gracie in UFC 1 with complete enthusiasm and fell in love with the sport, realizing that even Gracie was able to defeat his foe. Coleman's opponent, Moti Horenstein, was 31 years old, the same age as Coleman, 185 centimeters tall, 105 kilograms, three-time Israeli karate champion. He was absent wrestling experience altogether, which made it crucial to keep his distance from Coleman, although that was a tall ask, as Stein fell into a trap from which there was no way out. Coleman continues to break the defense of his opponent, throwing a multitude of precise strikes to the head. And Big John has had enough. Mark Coleman's TKO victory sends him to the semifinals of the tournament. The last quarterfinal pair was John Campitella versus Gary Goodridge. John Campitella was 27 years old, weighing 106 kilograms, standing at 175 centimeters, and fighting in the American Campo style. His opponent was Gary Big Daddy Goodridge. Prior to starting his career in martial arts, Goodridge worked as a welder at a Honda plant. Goodridge was the 91st World Arm Wrestling Champion and recent owner of an honorary 4th degree black belt in the art of Kuksilwan Karate for only about a month's time. Campitella immediately confronted Goodridge and attempted to knock him down with punches. A real fight ensued as the fighters stood up, a karate knee kick, clinch, and Campitella throws two precise uppercuts, a killing blow to Goodridge's cover. Very dangerous. Big Daddy pulls the opponent to the ground, preventing Campitella from striking, and through his maneuvering, Goodridge arrives in an advantageous position, where he strikes Campitella's open head. McCarthy stops the fight. Gary Goodridge wins by TKO. Campitella disagrees with the referee's decision, to no avail. Gary Goodridge was destined to reach the semifinals. Here are the semifinal bouts: Don Frye vs. Brian Johnston, and Mark Coleman vs. Gary Goodridge. Don Frye is the first to enter the octagon. Morale is on his side as the audience erupts for Frye. He feels her support and would have every chance to reach the final of this tournament. But it won't be easy, since his rival, Brian Johnston, also has experience in wrestling, not to mention powerful striking. And Johnston's motivation is through the roof. By defeating the champion, he would be bestowed with unmatched notoriety. Frye immediately throws blows to the body, but Johnston was ready for this. The fighters engage in the clinch and mutually attack each other with blows. The clinch continues, as the pair does not want to give in to one another. Frye attacks dangerously with his head, and Johnston immediately responds and does not shrink before the champion, throwing a series of punches. Yes, Johnston really looks good, and Frye, realizing this, decides to transfer his opponent to the ground, a comfortable environment for himself. The Predator controls Johnston, periodically kissing the body. Johnston's functionality began to fail. The writing was on the wall that he would have no chance of crawling out from under the champion. Appreciating the gravity of the situation, Johnston gave up. Don Frye reaches the final of the tournament and awaits the winner of Mark Coleman versus Gary Goodridge. Mark Coleman comes out first. He realizes that he was superior to his rival in wrestling skills, and that Goodridge could hit well and would likely have the upper hand in striking. Therefore, he realized he needed to control the combative habitat. Gary Goodridge, with a relaxed and confident gait, himself moves to the octagon. Goodridge needs to decide the question in the stands, whether he has enough skills to keep Coleman at a distance. Let's take a look. Coleman immediately takes to his strengths, drawing Big Daddy to the floor where he begins attacking, throwing dangerous headbutts to the opponent's face. Coleman made very violent attacks. But despite this, Goodridge finds the strength to rise. He holds onto the cage with his hands. Coleman hits Goodridge's head with dangerous uppercuts behind his back. Big Daddy doesn't want to go back to the ground and starts to save himself by simply moving along the cage, as if he was looking for a way out to avoid a beating. Look at the second in Goodridge's corner, who distracts him with clues. Coleman does not get lost and throws killer blows here. It's becoming scary for Goodridge. Finally, Goodridge decides to answer. He strikes Coleman with his knees, but Coleman takes Goodridge's back and again throws killer blows to the head of Big Daddy, who inexplicably continues to stand at the cage, holding onto it and little else. Finally, Goodridge turns around, and the fight continues in a standing position. Gary Goodridge is very angry. He takes revenge for his suffering. He turns it on, as they say, but Coleman gives more. A few seconds, and Goodridge is back on the floor. How many blows to his head has he missed in this fight? It's scary to even count. Goodridge decides to surrender, as it became difficult for him to continue, and Mark Coleman reaches the final of the tournament, where Don Frye is rested. And now, the final of UFC 10, Don Frye versus Mark Coleman. Coleman made a good debut in MMA, immediately going to the final of the tournament. Remarkably similar, Don Frye's debut in the 8th tournament led him to the championship. Whether Coleman could repeat Frye's success in his debut, whether Frye would be able to become the UFC champion for the second time, we will soon find out. A real fight ensues in the octagon, in which Coleman takes the champion's back, and Coleman pins Frye against the cage, throwing solid punches to Frye's head. Frye tries to defend himself, but Coleman was so energized and determined for this fight, as if he had bet everything he has on the outcome. All or nothing, he seems to reciprocate fate, which gave him a chance to perform at this tournament, and he had no right to let her down. And so Coleman attempts a choke, but Frye counters. The fight continues in a standing position. Frye realizes that Coleman has the advantage and forges ahead, but misses the passage to the body and ends up on the floor. Coleman clearly surpasses his opponent on the ground by a head. The fighters are very tired, and McCarthy stops this fight after 6 minutes. Half of the allotted time has passed, and a short break is taken. Both rivals no longer have the strength, but they have an unbroken will to win and a fighting character. And on this character alone, Frye goes on the offensive. He shows that he cannot be broken. He is eager to win this championship. Coleman, literally on wrestling reflexes, extinguishes this attack. Fighters on the ground. Coleman is in an advantageous position, strikes, and takes Frye's back, but the Predator provides resistance and shows that he is still in the game. Then, with what appeared to be superhuman strength, Coleman simply raises Don Frye and then shows that he, too, can be very good at being ahead. Absolutely, Frye is not in an enviable position, but shows that he is ready to fight to the end. Coleman, meanwhile, strikes Frye in the head, and Big John McCarthy stops this fight. Coleman looks at Frye and does not quite understand why the fight was stopped, insisting on a continuation of the fight. But it's over. Mark Coleman wins by TKO and becomes the UFC 10 tournament champion. If you like this video and are eager to see even more such tournaments, be sure to press thumbs up, as well as leave your comments, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel. See you at the next tournament. Take care.